Hey, how you doing? It's Clayton here from howtodrawcomics.net, and today what I'd like to share with you is 5 ways to not practice comic book art. And the reason that I wanted to make this video is that when it comes to learning how to draw comics, there's so many different ways to go about it. And of course we know that one of the major components to actually getting good at it is practice. But there are some ways that you should go about practicing and other ways that you should avoid. So that's what I'm going to share with you today, and I've got them listed down here on my mobile phone. I came up with them last night actually as I was getting ready for bed. I thought that this would be a great video to share with you guys. So here's the first one: not having a goal. Whenever you sit down to practice a study or some aspect of your comic book art that you're going to use to level up and improve your skills, it's important to know exactly what the end outcome is going to be. Like, what do you want to get out of that particular practice section? Let me give you an example. Say that you really want to learn how to draw comic book characters. Well, there's a lot of components that go into comic book characters. There's figure drawing, there's anatomy, there's the different parts of the body that you want to learn how to draw and get good at. There's gesture, there is body language, there's how to pose the character in a compelling way that suggests their personality, that gives them a certain amount of energy. There is proportions, of course. This is another major one. And, they're just all popping into my head now as I speak. There's so many different things that go into just a comic book character, let alone an entire comic book scene. So the way in which you want to go about it is you want to focus on each one of those things individually and practice them as many times as you need to until you can get good at them. So what do I mean by that exactly? Well, if you are setting out to learn how to draw a comic book character, well, what part of that character do you want to get good at? Because you can't get good at all of it all at once. Your learning capacity just isn't going to be able to handle that much information and be able to incorporate it and absorb it enough for you to actually become competent with all those things at once. So you have to zoom in on and take it one little bit at a time, okay? So small chunk the process. That way it's not so overwhelming for you either, it's not as intimidating. If you know that not only are you only going to focus on learning how to draw the head for that day, but you're only going to focus on learning how to draw a single facial feature on that head, it becomes a lot more manageable. It becomes less scary to practice. So, for example, you might decide that you want to learn how to practice or how to draw eyes. So you might spend an entire day just drawing eyes, and that's fine, that's great. With that very small component within the character as a whole, you'll be able to practice it and you'll be able to get good at it in a realistic amount of time. And you really will be able to. And it's a lot better to approach any aspect of your comic book art in that way, because this is the way in which we learn. We need to set our mind on a specific goal in order for it to actually know what it is aiming toward, to be motivated, to know that what we're setting out to do is in fact achievable and a realistic goal. Because if you are just aimlessly drawing away, and many of us do this, when we first start learning how to draw comic books, we're told that the more you draw the better, right? So we open up our sketchbooks and we just draw whatever. We draw whatever we see from observation. And yeah, this is true, but it's really, it's not practice in a purposeful way. Like, you're not going to get that much out of it because you haven't really set in stone what exactly it is you're trying to get out of it. So that's the first point. Make sure that you have a goal in mind when you sit down to practice doing your comic book art. Write it down. It's important. Okay, you might practice heads one day, you might practice the body the next day, you might practice arms, then legs, then you might practice how to join them all together. This is how the great Todd McFarlane learned how to draw. Okay, so the next point, so point number 2, you don't want to, the biggest mistake that you can make is being blind to your artistic flaws, so not knowing where those areas for improvement are. Now, this can come about from an enlarged, overblown ego, thinking that you're already fantastic at doing comic book art, being so competent that there's nothing more for you to learn. Now, when you get to that point, no matter what level of experience or skill you're at, you're going to find that you immediately stop improving. Okay, now if you're getting to that point very early on in your comic drawing journey, then you might find that your art kind of stays very, very stagnant. You kind of reach that glass ceiling and you're not able to get above it. So you have to be analytical and you have to be fair on yourself and honestly look at the areas within your art that actually could be improved on. Okay, you can't put on the rose-colored glasses and see your art as totally perfect with nothing left to do that is going to make it better. So for example, in my own artwork currently, I've been drawing for a fair few years now, but there are still areas in which I can improve, and one of the key areas for me at the moment is drawing hands and feet. Probably one of the things that I struggle with the most, being able to get my characters to emote more. A lot of these higher level tier areas of comic book illustration where you are starting to get into things like conveying body language, conveying personality, conveying story, composition, mood, that kind of stuff. These are areas within your comic art craft that are likely always going to need to be worked on, because once you start to focus on one area of your art, the other areas tend to start to get a little bit rusty, especially even if you haven't revisited them in a long time. So, you're constantly juggling these things, the different components that go into what your comic book art is, what it's made up of, the various components that you need to practice on a regular basis, that you need to polish up on in order to make sure that you're in peak condition as a comic book artist. It's not like you learn it once and then that's all there is to it. You know it forever. Yes, you will know the basics forever. You'll always have some level of familiarity with it, but that doesn't mean that if you haven't drawn in a while that you're not going to find it a little bit difficult, that there won't be a little bit of friction there that is involved when it comes to getting back into it. It's kind of like, say for example that, God forbid, you're in a very bad accident of some kind and you're bedridden for a few months. You know how to walk, but the chances are when you get out of bed after those few months, it's going to be a little bit shaky. Your legs aren't going to be as strong. You're going to have to remind yourself how to put one step in front of the other again. I know it's an extreme example, but comic book art is a little bit the same. It's like if you haven't drawn hands in a while, or let's say that you only draw male characters but you haven't drawn women in a long time, it's going to be much more difficult for you, even if you have had past experience drawing women, for you to get back into it and draw them in a way which is aesthetically pleasing to the same standard that you were drawing them at before you'd taken that break. So make sure that you're humble enough. Okay? If you're humble, then you'll always be improving, because you'll always see that potential for growth within yourself as an artist. If you're not humble and you think that you're already a pro, that your art don't stink, then you're going to find that you just don't progress. In fact, you'll probably start going backwards because you're not being kept on your toes. You're not aware enough of your art and your own artistic level of ability for you to really make a difference in your art, to make a significant leap in its level of quality. Now the other reason that you may be blind to the areas of your art that are capable of improvement is it just may be the case that you're not really putting your art out there enough for people to give you feedback on it. And in this day and age of social media, there's more than enough opportunity to even reach out to the comic book pros, send your artwork off to them and get that feedback. Because when you're only looking at your art through your own perspective, the issues that arise from that is that you're not able to get that fresh set of eyes on your work. Like you're too attached to it, you're too involved with it, and so you're looking at it through a completely different lens, which is too associated to the work that you're creating. So a fresh perspective can really come in handy. That if you get someone else to look at your artwork, they're going to see things that you might not be able to see, that literally you are blind to, not out of your own doing, but just from the way in which we tend to process things with our minds. The more familiar we get with things, the more we tend to skip the details, because we already know it so much that our brain just doesn't need to store that much information about it. And so it's not going to see the things that other people might see. You know how, it's called the reticular activation system. In other words, we only really pay attention to the things that we're focused on in any one point of time. And if you're so competent and so good at your comic book art that you really don't need to pay attention to it, you're kind of at that point where you've got unconscious competence, what you're going to find is that you do start to miss things that you probably would have paid more attention to before you got really good. So again, the most important point to take away here is that it's incredibly valuable for you not to be blind to the areas for improvement within your art that you can make when it comes to practicing, because of course once you can see those flaws, you know exactly what needs attention, you know exactly what to attend to, which is how you're going to find out what you need to practice for the day. Now, point number 3, attaching your self-worth to your art. This is certainly not a way to practice comic book art, because in essence, practice is really a exercise that you indulge in when you're trying to get better at something. And if you're attaching your self-worth to your comic book art and you don't think that it's that great, then you're going to think that you're not that great as a person. And I know that this is, it seems silly to kind of bring up, like, who attaches their self-worth to their artwork? Well, a lot of artists actually do, because we've created it. It's like a child that we've spawned, like we have a certain level of love and for it and pride within the work that we do. So when it doesn't quite come out the way in which we expected it to, when people maybe put it down, when it's not as accepted as we think it's going to be, when others point out the flaws within it, we tend to become very offended by that. It breaks our heart, because it's almost like we're being criticized as a person. But you have to really separate yourself from the artwork that you do, because especially if you want to get into the comic book industry, or you just want to work for an independent client, they are going to give you their feedback, and a lot of the time they're not going to be perfectly happy with the work that you're giving them. So you'll have to keep your ears open for their critique, and you'll have to really look for those areas again where you can improve, while at the same time not being offended by the fact that you're not perfect. And I think that the way in which you need to get the way in which is easiest to get over this is just to know that it's okay not to be perfect. You're not supposed to be perfect. Jim Lee hasn't reached the level of perfection that he wants to get to within his comic book art. If he did, he would probably find doing comic book art very, very boring. Part of the reason we love drawing comics so much is because it provides that fun challenge. It's like a difficult video game that kind of draws you in and keeps you there because of the fact that it is so challenging. So just because you lose the video game every now and then and you have to restart the level doesn't mean you have to hate yourself. Don't beat up on yourself just because your artwork isn't quite at the level that it needs to be at to meet your unrealistic expectations. And a lot of the time we do have unrealistic expectations of our comic book art. I know that I certainly do. I do want to be the next Mark Silvestri and Jim Lee, and I can tell you that my artwork isn't quite there yet, unfortunately. So you really shouldn't compare yourself to others anyway. That's just something that is difficult for us not to do sometimes, especially when we're inspired by the very artists that got us into doing comic book art in the first place. But as I said, just really try your hardest to detach yourself from your work from time to time. Look at it through the lens of honest eyes, an unbiased perspective, and you'll be able to keep yourself balanced. And the reason as to why that's important when it comes to practicing your comic book art is because, again, you're practicing because you're not quite yet good enough yet to not have to practice. So that in itself means that you're not perfect, okay? And you probably never will be. So just try to keep that in mind, and I think that you'll find that you feel much better about your artwork, that you are able to take the pressure off of yourself, and that because of that, you're motivated to keep on going. You're motivated to practice every single day, and to really take this through to the very bitter end, no matter where that might lead. Okay, so point number 4, being entitled to your talent without doing anything to to deserve it, right? In other words, what I'm talking about here is laziness, right? So a lot of the time, the idea of being a comic book artist is very, very attractive. You know, it looks fun from the outside in, but if you're already doing comic book art and you're very, you're already into the comic art game where you're working hard at building up your skill set and you're trying to make that little bit of extra progress each and every day, year in and year out. They say that it takes 10,000 hours of constant practice to reach mastery. It's a very, very long time. And depending on how you practice, it can take even longer. But it's important to know what it's going to take. It's important to know what you're going to have to do to deserve the level of artistic prowess that you want to attain. Because it's going to take a lot to get you there. A lot of dedication, a lot of sacrifice, and an extreme amount of discipline in order for you to be able to get to the point where you're creating the kind of artwork that you're happy with, okay? Where you're reaching your own expectations. A lot of the time, your friends and family, they're going to say, hey, you know what, you're making some real badass artwork there. They're going to love it. They're going to pat you on the back and they're going to say it's great. But our worst critics are ourselves, okay? The people that we have to satisfy the most, that are never going to be pleased, no matter what we do, is ourselves, because we have these, a lot of the time, realistic expectations that we've got to reach, and we're just not going to be satisfied until we reach them. And this is what keeps us going. It's an important fuel to have because it creates this ever-flowing river of inspiration for us to keep pushing us forward, to keep moving us toward that goal of perfection that we have, even if it is a never-ending journey, even if we never reach that point. It does get us through the initial stages of, practicing the fundamentals, getting good at them, practicing, developing a style, and really taking it to the epitome of what you can take it to. You'll never get there if you're not pushed toward it, if you're not motivated. Maybe I should say pulled toward it rather than pushed. But it's a little bit of both. You've got to push yourself and you've got to make sure that you're passionate enough about being a comic book artist that you are constantly pulled toward it. When you don't feel that pull anymore, that's the point in time when you really got to ask yourself, well, what are you being pulled toward right now? What is motivating you? Because maybe comic art isn't really your passion, especially if you're lazy. So don't be lazy, because it's very easy to sit back on the weekend and just binge watch Netflix series on the TV. It's very easy to just go out and waste time with your friends. You should hang out with friends and you should hang out with loved ones, but you shouldn't necessarily be using that time with them to procrastinate on your comic book art and developing your comic art skill set. It's very easy to just procrastinate on YouTube. I do it all the time. Trust me, it's extremely easy to do that. But in order to really see a significant impact within the level of quality that your work has in it, you've got to make sure that you're putting that stuff on hold that doesn't really matter so much, and you're paying your dues, you're making the sacrifices, you're putting the work in. Because the thing about comic book art is it's one of those things that you're going to pursue where in order to see anything from it, you're going to need to put into it. You're going to need to invest time, energy, and effort. So if you're just innately lazy and you're not willing to, put out any level of effort, you're not willing to go through any level of pain, any level of suffering, then you're going to find that you're probably not going to stick with comic book art for a long time. You're just not going to be motivated or pumped up enough to do it. You really need that drive to see a significant result within your artwork. So avoid laziness at all costs. Increase your level of dedication. I have a great video on this particular topic on the YouTube channel. Actually, I'll link to it underneath this video, that talks about how to overcome resistance and procrastination. And it's something that every comic book artist should watch if they want to increase their level of discipline, if they want to get really, really good at developing a strong focus muscle, because that ability to focus for an extended period of time on a single thing is really the key. And in all honesty, a dwindling commodity within most of us that is going to take you a very, very long way. Okay, so the last point here, number 5, giving up too easily. This is, of course, another way not to practice your comic book art. Now, it seems like kind of like an oxymoron there. Like, how can you be practicing your comic book art if you're giving up constantly? And that's a very, very good point, because you can't really. It's like, if you sit down to practice, again, going back to our previous examples, say that you're focused on really getting good at female heads, right? Something that that I have done a lot of in my time, you know, and it paid off. You know, I feel comfortable drawing female heads and heads in general at this point because I have practiced, right? And you'll find that the better you get at things, the result of that is you become more comfortable, you become more confident, you worry about it less, and it feels good to just draw because you know, before that, oftentimes it feels like you're just constantly struggling along the way, like you're finding a roadblock at every single corner that you take. But once you get past that and you start getting good, the creativity and the love of the creativity and the feel-good vibes that come from it really start to become more and more prominent within the creative process. So, you know, back to my point, if you're practicing female heads and you're drawing like half a head and then throwing it in the bin and scrunching it up because you're not happy with the half of the head that you've done, that's called giving up, right? If you draw like a character and the initial pose doesn't work out, so you throw it in the bin and you give up for the day and you watch YouTube videos for the rest of it, then you're giving up. If you decide to draw an illustration, you finish the illustration and it doesn't really come out the way that you expect it to, and you decide not to draw for a week or a month, then you're giving up. Here's what you should do instead. When you're practicing, stick with anything that you've set out to do. So say that you draw the female head and you draw half of it, but it doesn't quite, it's not going in the direction that you want it to. Well, don't throw it away, okay? Ask yourself, what is it exactly that I'm not liking about the direction that this head has gone in? And really look for the areas, because this is a great opportunity for you to learn something new, for you to really assess and for you to really assess and apply what you're learning from that assessment in order to see a real change in your work, you know, to really attend to the flaws that might be present within it. But if you're not observant enough, if you're not sticking with it enough to ever give yourself that opportunity to see where those areas for improvement are going to be, then you're not going to improve one bit. You're just going to be essentially half-assing your practice and not really seeing any results from it. You really have to see everything through to the end. So you draw half the head and you fix up the errors, okay? So you have an eraser for a reason. You erase what doesn't look right, you reshape it, you remold it, you resize it if need be, and then you keep on going with that female head, okay? You see it through to the end so that by the end of the day you've got a finished female head there on the page no matter what. You've gone through all the obstacles and challenges you needed to go through in order to arrive at that final outcome, but you did it, okay? You battled through it, and that's the most important thing. This is where practice becomes most beneficial, when you're being challenged, when you're able to overcome those obstacles. When things are easy, you're not learning, okay? The fact that you're being challenged, that it feels like an effort, that it's a struggle, that's just your brain learning stuff, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily feel good to learn. Like, you have to focus and you have to concentrate and you have to make sure that you're analyzing things on a logical level, because you know, thinking in the ideal realms of, you know, maybe I could be this, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'm that, isn't really going to help you at all. You have to really look at what's there objectively, and you have to address things objectively, and then you have to apply what you've learned from those logical assessments in a practical way. And that's when you will start seeing that, hey, that female head that you did yesterday you might have struggled with, but now the female head that you're doing today, or the page of female heads that you're practicing for today, are going to become easier and easier. The flaws and that you experienced and that you took note of, the struggles and the challenges that you went through, are now things that don't really impact you in any significant way because you've overcome them. Now you're able to take what you've learned and apply it, and it's built into the process that you've created for yourself. And this is really the harnessing of your personal creative process. That's what practice is at the end of the day. It's you getting to know the tools and how to use them. It's you getting to know yourself as an artist in your approach and how you work, what's going to give you the best outcome. So that's about it. Let's recap these real quick, just so that we can kind of remind ourselves what to keep in mind when it comes to the 5 ways not to practice doing your comic book art. So, number 1, not having a goal. You got to make sure that you have a goal in order to get anything out of the the time you've spent practicing. Number 2, being blind to your artistic flaws. Okay, let go of the ego. Be humble, and that's when you're going to start seeing those areas of improvement, and that's going to tell you exactly what you need to focus on. It's basically your compass, right, when it comes to the areas for improvement that you're going to be able to make through practice. Attaching your self-worth to your art, don't do that. That's not a good idea. That's just going to make you feel discouraged and not make you want to pursue comic book art anymore, because it's never going to be perfect. And knowing that that is okay is one of the core beliefs that you must have as an artist in order to stay sane. Being entitled to talent without building it up, right? Without actually putting in any amount of effort. In other words, laziness. Make sure that you realize what it's going to take when it comes to actually getting your skills to the level that you want them to be at. And if you can look, and if you realistically know what it's going to take, then you'll be prepared. Okay, you'll be prepared to do what it takes, and you'll ultimately see it through to the end because you never thought it was going to be easy. You knew it'd be hard, and you prepared yourself for it. Number 5, of course, giving up too easily. Never give up. Keep on going. No matter what it is you're practicing, keep on attempting over and over again that particular subject until you get good at it, until you've mastered it. And with all those 5 points listed down, I hope that you'll be able to take them and use them to benefit you in the best way possible as far as practicing your comic book art. I really hope that you found this video useful and that you got a ton of value out of it. Thanks so much for watching. If you'd like more comic art tips, tricks, and tutorials, be sure to visit us at howtodrawcomics.net, www.howtodrawcomics.net, where you'll find a ton of tutorials, more videos just like this one, as well as demonstrations. You'll find courses that kind of delve deeper into a lot of these topics, and a blog role which is rapidly expanding as I upload more and more posts to that every day. But yeah, and we even got a podcast. How cool is that? So lots of stuff on the website if you're into drawing comics. Make sure you visit it. Again, www.howtodrawcomics.net. And until next time, keep on practicing, keep on creating, and I'll catch you in the next video.